Warning. The following broadcast is not approved by your teacher, university, politician, or government. Side effects may include skepticism, better reasoning skills, liberty, peace, and an escape from the woke.
Welcome to the show. I am your host, LB Muniz, and this is the Been Awake podcast for better sense making, episode 101. We go live in X Spaces Tuesdays or Wednesday nights around 9 p.m. I would love it if you're listening to the recording of this to join live and talk about whatever's on your mind, what either the topics we discuss on the show or maybe something that you want to bring. If this is your first time listening or watching, this show is designed to help you make better sense of the world. We leverage insights of philosophy, psychology, theology, and politics to better understand the interesting times we live in. And we do it without the bluster that most talking heads need to make an impact. So if you're looking for a show that unpacks complicated topics in a way that makes sense, I'd like to believe you've come to the right place. The last few shows that we did were a little on the esoteric side. I talked a few episodes ago about why an edgelord will never rule, and then I tried to sketch out the idea of the cult of American democracy while also looking at the idea of concepts and ideas in and of themselves. For episode 100, I talked about hierarchy and equality, how they are linked at a fundamental level, and how the differences in perspective on this issue drives most of what we consider to be today our political discourse. So today, instead, I want to return to some news and examine some cultural impacts from them and also extract important concepts that are behind the ideas so that you can better understand the world that you inhabit. But before we do that, let me sincerely ask you to like the show wherever you're listening and subscribe on your favorite platform, if you would be so kind. You can also subscribe with your email address at beenawake.com, and of course, follow me here on X and Instagram at the LB Muniz. So I think we have a few interesting topics that I want us to go over here tonight. We're going to talk a little bit at the end about 600,000 unit high-rise that was built for the homeless in Los Angeles. Pearl Davis also tweeted about how a man will always prefer a newer, uglier woman to the hottie he currently has. And I stumbled across an ancient Japanese practice implemented to root out Christians back in the day. And of course, the recent bill passed in Louisiana dealing with the 10 Commandments being displayed in school. But before we get to those, I do want to say, as it's breaking news this week, that it is a good thing that Julian Assange is out of prison. And it's incredible to think about the fact that he spent the last 14 years defying the U.S. government in a way before finally signing this plea deal, coincidentally right before the 2024 election. Personally speaking, I was a child, barely a teenager, when WikiLeaks and Julian Assange became a household name. And at the outset, I certainly believed all the negative propaganda about him endangering American personnel and American interests abroad. What a lifetime of study since has shown me, and what I try to show on this show, is that those interests, generally speaking, are not in line with the American people, and the government never actually presented any evidence in court to prove that the WikiLeaks dumps ever directly led to harming personnel. Now, this isn't to say Assange is a perfect man. I'm sure he has his mistakes. But clearly, the world was a better place when government and intelligence agencies feared what WikiLeaks and other media organizations would leak their emails and criminal activities. Because that's what nobody cares about their average activities, right? It's about the criminal stuff that the government is doing in our name. Now, make no mistake, the house arrest and imprisonment Assange has faced over the last decade and a half is more than most men could bear. But I must say, it's a little sad to see that this saga ended with a plea deal, what is essentially an admission of guilt on Assange's part for the act of journalism. And, for better or worse, likely worse, it does set a dangerous precedent for the future, but it also provides us an opportunity to look squarely at yet another failure of the constitutional order. Whatever other charges they tried to convict him of, espionage is what they wanted to brand him with since the beginning. The First Amendment of the Constitution is supposed to limit the power government has to do exactly this. But after a century, the Espionage Act has finally claimed its first victim, an Australian named Julian Assange. It will be interesting to see what the next act of Assange's life looks like, and whether he still plans to be the firebrand of his youth. For now, I think it's enough for him to be with his family, and for the first time, to be with his family for the first time as a relatively free man. But speaking of the First Amendment, Louisiana has a new bill requiring the Ten Commandments to be displayed in public school classrooms across the state. This sent various camps on X into a flurry of activity, and I'll be honest, even I entered the fray for a little bit to entertain myself on Saturday when I had nothing better to do. One reaction in particular that came across my desk was a post reading, quote, "If the Ten Commandments belong in public schools, then so does old Baphomet." Now, Baphomet, if you don't know, was said to be a pagan idol worshipped by some of the Knights Templar during the Spanish Inquisition, but its modern form, in that we've seen it recently, has been from the Church of Satan countering Christian imagery. So a lot of Christians think the Ten Commandments should be displayed here or there, and the Satanists want to put up their statue across the street from them, or in many cases right next to it. From what I can tell, the constitutional argument isn't as solidly against this bill as the precedents Stone v. Graham established in the 80s. While both argue that the purpose of displaying the Ten Commandments is secular in implementation, the Louisiana bill seems to specify that other documents can be hung, as well as stating specifically how the commandments are to be displayed so as not to tie them to a particular church who might think to donate the picture. Then there's also the 2022 Kennedy versus Bremerton decision to consider. If you're not familiar, that's the case where a public school football coach led a prayer circle after his football games and was suspended because the school was worried that his action of prayer, his expression of prayer might be said, might open them up to some sort of civil liability. In that case, the majority asserts that, quote, "In forbidding Mr. Kennedy's prayers, the district sought to restrict his actions because of their religious character, thereby burdening his right to free exercise. As to his free speech claim, the timing and circumstances of Kennedy's prayer, during the post-game period when coaches were free to attend briefly to personal matters and students were engaged in other activities, confirm that Kennedy did not offer his prayers while acting within the scope of his duties as the coach. The district, therefore, cannot show its prohibition serves as a compelling purpose and is narrowly tailored to achieve that purpose." So basically, they discriminated against him because he was a Christian. Now, my understanding is that some of the Louisiana lawmakers are saying that this signals a more friendly interpretation to having some sort of Christian imagery in schools, and that makes their bill better. Now, let's be honest about this situation. The Louisiana bill is already being challenged, and more than likely, it seems that the Supreme Court will have to rule on the meaning of the Establishment Clause once again. Maybe that's the ultimate reason for passing a bill like this, but I think the cultural implications of this are far more of interest to me and worth investigating. So let's go back to that post I was discussing before. It wasn't the 5 pillars of Islam or a collection of Buddhist sayings that the poster said deserved to be in the classroom adjacent to the Ten Commandments. No. Instead, it was an icon from the Church of Satan. I think this says a lot about the mindset of many stuck within the liberal frame. If all beliefs are equal, then there's no difference between the Church of Satan and Christianity writ large. However, for anyone who would bother to do even the most basic of historical or theological research, would very quickly and clearly see the impact both belief systems have had upon humanity. One bound together the continents and built what today we call the Western tradition, and the other is a modern rebellion from maybe 50 years ago, but has much more ancient roots, against traditionalist ways that created the stability that they seek to undermine. To be pedantic yet clear, one is good, the other is evil. Now, the Establishment Clause is the line of text in the First Amendment that reads, "Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion." Now, and let's also be honest with ourselves. It'll be up to the lawyers and judges that participate in this case to reestablish just what it means to establish a religion. Even if the Founding Fathers bear little theological and religious resemblance to the evangelical Christians that make up a large portion of today's American population, I'm not sure one could argue they would treat demonic imagery with the same cavalier attitude as the liberals of today have espoused in the wake of this bill. As for my little spat, I merely asked a question: what do you have against the Ten Commandments? Which caught the ire of a couple other posters who decided to educate me on constitutional law without ever citing a single case precedent. I'm far more interested in exploring why it is that people have such a knee-jerk reaction against recognizing an obvious fact about the Western tradition, namely that it's rooted in Christian values. More to the point, I think this bill and the conversation surrounding it points to another crack in the foundation for the modern cult of American democracy. Secularism itself has become an idol people want to defend at all costs, even to the point of inviting explicit satanic imagery into the classrooms of school children. This cultural Mexican standoff isn't going to end well, at least not for the participants of the cult. It also shows the oversimplistic legal attitude we have in the USA towards religion. Without a doubt, there we have witnessed a spiritual revolution in the practices and curriculum of universities, high schools, and elementary schools. It is the same cult we discuss here on the show of diversity, equity, and inclusion, which deliberately sets out to invert the order that built the civilization we find ourselves in. And like a game of Jenga, if we remove one too many pieces from the foundation, everything will come toppling down. For my part, I don't blame the politicians who want to display good things about human history, but the ones who would abide evil. Let's stay on cultural trends for just a minute. Pearl Davis, who's popular in the Red Pill movement, had a recent post on X that I want to dissect briefly. I've talked about her on the show before, and I did an episode or wrote a piece, maybe both, about her appearance on Michael Knowles' show and the interview that they had where she advocated against marriage. But for a quick recap, she's a young woman who questions many commonly held truths about our culture as it surrounds marriage and dating. That's reductionist but accurate. Her contention is that men at the moment should not enter marriage because women have too much power under the current system. If you want a more detailed analysis, I'd recommend you check out that episode that I was talking about before. While a fan of the red pill metaphor, I've written about it, you can find it on the pages of beenawake.com, I can't say I agree much with the cultural prescriptions that have been espoused from this particular camp, but that's fruit for another conversation. Pearl posted the following: if a man is married to a woman that's an 8 and a new woman who is a 6 is still more desirable to him, you can't compete with new pussy, and that's terrifying to women. Like so many things espoused from the cultural red pill types, this has just enough validity to throw people into a fervor. So let's dismantle this together and see where we end up. Pearl is saying that if a man has a wife who is beautiful, a woman who is less beautiful will be more, quote, desirable because she is new to him. Now, to enter into the conversation, I reposted by saying, is she wrong? No. Is she right? No. Is it sad? Yes. Because she's not wrong. Part of men's sex drive is one of conquest. Genetically speaking, our basic monkey brains understand that the more women we procreate with, the greater likelihood our genes have to survive. This is a mating strategy. This is true. She's not right because desire isn't really the right word. We're talking more about a basic physical attraction, or lust would be a better one. More often than not, this is a fleeting physical feeling that a man might experience, and he could still desire and be attracted to his current wife under the strictures of her metaphor. As I've discussed before, polygyny is arguably a far more natural state of man, but it comes with cultural downfalls that monogamy does not. In historical cases of polygamy, women were treated as property accumulated by powerful men. In modern cases of so-called polyamory, it's usually an arrangement between one partner who has more control in the relationship and invariably wants the arrangement more than the other person, and most of these so-called arrangements tend to flame out much quicker than an unhappy monogamous marriage would. Additionally, one can understand that just because there is a desire or attraction, it does not follow that one should act upon it. This is the age-old debate between pleasure and duty. It's a conversation as old as humanity itself. What's sad is the fact that thousands turn to Pearl for her wisdom in these matters. It's also sad that the reason why a Pearl can gain traction in the chorus of commentary is that so many have lost their way when it comes to marriage and having a solid relationship to build upon and to raise children within. See, the other side of the coin that Pearl and her devotees don't consider is that it's, because we talked about mating rituals before, right? It's just as true that it is true that a man can have more offspring by impregnating multiple women, of course, right? That happens a lot. It's also true that those offspring stand a far better chance of reproducing themselves and also a far better chance of transmitting better cultural values when their parents are in a pair-bonded relationship. That is to say, marriage. Neither mating strategy is exclusive to our species, but only one builds civilization. And there's so many other problems I have with these modern red pill types. They're basically just a reaction to feminism. They have very little original things to say or unique things to say. But I think we do well to remember that people are listening to them, and so it's important to address their claims. So to restate it briefly, for the purposes of our conversation here tonight, yes, you can go out and you can sow your seeds and you can do all that. But that's not the best way to build a society, and that's not the best way to live a virtuous life of a kind. Instead, it's far better to take a mating strategy that relies upon pair bonding relationships. And yes, divorce courts are bad, and men sometimes get a bad rap. Women sometimes get a bad rap too. They're just maybe better at arguing their case. But to take the conclusions that the modern red pill types do from these sorts of things is, well, it's sad. It bothers me. It's something that I wish more people would spend time thinking about. And with any luck, wisdom will come with age on the part of many of these people. So I'll take a quick pause because we got a couple of people. Jason, do you want to hop in? Or Daniel? Hopefully it gets picked up on my thing. I got two more stories that I want to cover briefly here before we get going for tonight. One was this story of a I alluded to it before. A $600,000 a unit high rise was built for the homeless in downtown LA. And anybody who's paid attention knows that California has a major homeless crisis. There's also the migrant crisis to be considered in things like this. But the specific philosophical point that I wanted to extract from this is a reminder of the dangers of believing in an unconstrained vision of man. The truth is, and this is a difficult truth if you're not already somebody who believes in it, but the truth is that some people make mistakes in their life, and sometimes that's not the fault of society. Sometimes people make bad decisions and they don't want to live up to them. Most of what we perceive as a homeless crisis is largely a mental health crisis in this country. That, again, I don't see this as particularly problematic to say. And a lot more of it has to do with drug usage. These are both problems that we have to deal with as a society. And the belief, I would have to think, behind this project of building this high rise and saying we're going to spend over $500,000 per unit to build this place for the homeless is predicated upon a completely outdated notion, but still holds traction, that the environment is what shapes the man, or woman as the case may be. But let's be honest, most of the people who are homeless are men. And that's just simply not true. Without a doubt, this high rise, if it ever opens up and it ever accepts the homeless, will soon become a hotbed of drug trade and other illicit acts that's going to lead the people who live there, or are going to keep the people who live there in a dangerous state of being. We've seen something like this practiced with the building of projects in various neighborhoods across the country of low-income housing, directly subsidized government housing. Most of these are not places that people want to live, and in short order, this place will be no different. So for the last story tonight, this is just something that came across my algorithm on X by Haruhi Aisaka. I think I pronounced that right. And it's an interesting thread about a practice that came about in Edo, Japan, to root out Christians, and it's called fumei, if I'm again reading this correctly. So in 1612, I'm just reading from her thread here. I'm assuming it's a woman. In 1612, the then ruler of Japan, Tokugawa Ieyasu. Tokugawa Ieyasu, I think I butchered that, formally outlawed Christianity throughout Japan. However, this was hard to enforce as many Christians practiced their faith in secret. In 1629, a new method was developed to expose Christians, the fumie. Japanese officials would go from house to house and demand everyone to trample on an image of Jesus Christ or the Virgin Mary. Those who were reluctant to or refused to do so were arrested, tortured, and killed for being Christians. Many martyrs refused to step on the images. Some trampled on the image and continued to be Christians in secret. Many more people abandoned the faith. Continuing her thread, in Nagasaki, the first Catholic city missionary stepped foot in, there were over 500,000 Christians before the persecution. With the introduction of the fumie, this number was reduced to 20,000 who continued to practice in secret. These Christians continued to practice their faith until Christianity was legalized in 1873. The discovery of these hidden Christians shocked the world. Pope Pius IX declared this the miracle of the Orient. When the persecution of Christians ceased, many fumie were recycled or thrown away, making authentic fumie extremely rare. The ones that survived were treated as cultural artifacts. It's interesting to ponder if you were in such a culture, what you would do in the face of it. And I'm not saying this I'm not by accident talking about this after we're talking about the Ten Commandments stories where people are saying, hey, well, if you want to have Christianity, that opens up the room for the devil. At some point, you have to be willing to stand up and believe for the things that you want to fight for. And you have to think hard about what those values are. I can understand the impetus of many Americans to put the Constitution in a very prominent place within that constellation of ideas. But I don't think it's a smart idea for the Constitution to be your God. So, hope that's given you guys something to think about. I hope you enjoyed this episode. And if anybody wants to pop in, I do appreciate the people who are in there live. If you have a comment or question or wanted to just have a quick chat.
I'll pop in.
Oh, hey, Jason. And yeah, other guys in there, if you want to request to speak, I will grant it. We can have a little bit of time having fun. What's up? You listen to the whole monologue, or close to it.
The entire thing I had to drop out because I accepted your challenge to speak, and then it wouldn't let me, so I had to drop out and then re-find you. So I'm all right. I got Australian AIDS, so that's been challenging. But other than that, it's fine. What do we want to talk about? This entire idea of if you put Christianity in school, you'll have to have Satanism as well. It speaks to, like, do you remember this was going around for a little bit where people were trying to identify or say that, Vader was the good guy all along, kind of thing. Yeah. There's something I've been working on. And it's part of this whole redemption kind of rabbit hole I'm putting my head through. But I'm coming up with this term. I'm calling it like the social elites, or the moral elites, I should call them. And essentially, what they do, they're part and parcel. The social elites are the moral elites, and kind of what they do often is they look to the lower classes, or that which has been maligned, and bring it up the cultural hierarchy in essence to redeem it. So I said this on Buck Johnson's latest show. If you look at the counterculture of, let's say, the Beatniks, or it started with jazz and then went into blues and stuff like that. They were essentially trying to incorporate and almost redeem black culture in white America, and this became really obvious when you have Elvis, which is literally the social elite saying, no, this guy is going to be our avatar to access black culture and to redeem it and make it part of our own. And in some ways, it's almost kind of a worshiping kind of mentality. Now, with a strong Christian ethos, you're always going to have this. I don't think this is just indicative to modernity. I think this is consistent in the human experience. Mm-hmm. The devil in the details here is that now when we don't have a king, when we have no regio, we have no real region, ruler, or religion, these things, these elements have no filter. So everything is brought up. Everything is exalted. Everything is attempted to be redeemed, and some things are just irredeemable. From, let's say, our perspective of like the good, the beautiful, the true. Mm-hmm. So, it's like you can take gangster rap and bring it into the mainstream in attempts to redeem it, to redeem its bad qualities and soften it and make it more universal. But in doing that, what you're actually doing, and this goes to Evola's idea of, sort of a nigrification of Americans and stuff like that. And you can have your whatever feelings you have about it, but I think that speaks directly to that mechanism of when you bring these things into the mainstream, because we don't have that proper filtering, you're taking all of it. And so all of it starts to seep in and starts to affect the host body in ways that were probably unintended. And because everyone lives in, we live in a society, it affects us. It begins to magnify bad characteristics and nullify good. And I'm still working this out, but yeah, that mechanisms is polluted. It's corrupted. And so all you're getting is just the worst of the worst now. And the ability to redeem it is becoming less and less. We're going to start seeing this with the DR, right? When dissident right ideas are now being redeemed by these social moral elites, it's going to get really interesting. And that ties into my neo-trads prediction and a whole bunch of other stuff. But.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it was, in the particular to the argument, I always think it's interesting that, as I kind of said, is like, that people will pick apart what the founding fathers actually believed in term, and I'm just using this because this is the way that most Americans would speak about it. Is like, you can say a lot about the founding fathers, what they believed or didn't believe. Not all of them were believers. Some of them were atheists of one kind or another, but I don't think any of them would have had the same fervor towards actual demonic imagery in schools, or that it should be taught on par with the tenets of Christianity. That itself is a very modern contrivance that I think is, again, it just shows how far people have lost their way. And that in the face of okay, fine, there's always a troll, there's always an edgelord who's going to post the most obscene thing. But then in turn that it's like, oh, but you just don't understand the Constitution. It's like, well, no, I do. And I just have a inkling that I know this was already decided by the Supreme Court at one point in time. And so there must be something different about this bill. But more importantly, do I, as a private person in 21st century America, really think it's a problem for the Ten Commandments to be up in a classroom? And the answer is no, especially when you compare it to the types of imagery and idols that are being introduced to the American classroom currently in terms of the cultural revolution that we've gone through recently in this country and that the West has experienced, broadly speaking, towards these particular ideas, right? We were supposed to kneel on the ground in reverence to Black Lives Matter, and now we're supposed to think it's a problem that the Ten Commandments are going to hang up in a classroom. Sorry, I just don't think people should spend their time arguing against it.
You're dealing with massively stupid people.
Yes, that's obvious.
I've resisted using the word stupid for a long time. I don't like being dismissive to people, especially if those people are affecting my life or life in general. I think that's a bad strat. At the same time, then I moved to Australia and I'm like, oh fuck, this is stupid. Like, how does this work? How has this worked for this long? This is so incredibly stupid. And when you encounter true blue mid-wittery stupidity of the kind that is almost staggering, then it kind of makes you rethink a bunch of stuff. Like Australia is a perfect example, and this is not just from me. I can't remember where I got this, but someone made the point that Australia runs under egalitarianism, like Millsian egalitarianism. It's like, they got founded by a bunch of people who believed in egalitarianism and just kind of rode with it. Even after Mills came out and said, yeah, egalitarianism doesn't really work, guys. And they're like, no, mate, nah, crikey, it's gonna work, right? They have it so embedded in the culture that people just can't outthink it.
Mm-hmm.
It's the true meme, the bell curve meme, where the midwit is just making up all these incredibly spurgy fucking excuses for the fact that your core problem is the system itself. That you have to deal with the egalitarian system itself in order to start to get daylight. And if you're not unwilling to do that, you just keep returning back to the central problem. And that's a major it's very pronounced to me, maybe because I'm not from here, so I don't have any real loyalties or allegiances. I just live here. I pay my taxes. I keep my head down. I generally speaking don't make many comments unless I'm on a podcast broadcast to a whole bunch of strangers. I'm waiting for this to be brought. I'm waiting for this to be brought by my visa, my future visa. Like, crikey, mate, you said some things. Like, yeah, well, I just try to keep it to like multisyllabic wording, so then maybe they'll confuse them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's generally the right way to go.
Yeah, just throw them off my scent.
Mm-hmm.
But where was I getting at? Yeah, so I talk a lot about liberal framing and the necessity to break the frame, not even to destroy liberalism per se, but if you're going to even try to fix it or address it in any meaningful way, you have to see it for what it is and not for what you think it is or what you want it to be.
Right.
And in doing so, suddenly a lot of answers become really obvious. Now, the will to carry out those answers or solutions, that's a different thing. But, when we're getting to immigration stuff, and David Gronowski put out a really great clip recently, which kind of tacks onto this idea, is that the response to the immigration crisis, which is dire and bad, and I understand it, right? I'm going to caveat a few things here. But, it's as bad as it is, whatever. But the response is we're just going to mass deport, 20 million people,
mm-hmm.
which sounds really based and amazing and cool, right? And I'm not saying you shouldn't, but then you have to start thinking about, well, what mechanisms are we going to give people, this government, who's proven itself to be corrupt, stupid, or evil, or all three? So we're going to give them more mechanisms to deport 20 million people, and then just assume that this won't be rolled back and have negative consequences on our ass, which is beyond stupid. It's just not dealing with reality. So I looked at that and said, my future prediction now is going to be, this is the way you get microchips in people. Because
how else do you know who's here legally?
Well, it's something that Matt and Matt uncovered, and I think we talked about this on one of our shows, maybe on the Friend or Fed, I can't remember, the PayPal Friend or Fed, is that one of the companies that is enveloped in that whole PayPal mafia ecosystem is this, and I'm shooting off the hip here. I don't have the information right in front of me, so bear with. But it's this Vietnamese guy who came up with essentially a tracking system to track people, right? I'm not sure if it was actually through microchips or not, but regardless, maybe it can be like e-passports. Will be, if it's on your phone, it's just a few degrees of separation from in your skin, right?
Sure.
And once that's established, because you're going to need a tech solution for this, there'll be easy attacking. You can attack some of the easy, barrios and favelas that are cropping up all over the United States. Those are obvious. But how do you get those people out of the cities? How do you get these people out from all over the place? And I think the technological response will be, well, we'll microchip them or make them have e-visas or whatever. They've already did that in Florida briefly with DeSantis. So once you establish that, then you'll have a marketplace for chipping. Well, once you have a marketplace for chipping, then you'll have elite designer biochips. They'll do a whole bunch of different functions. And once that hits the market, it's only a matter of time until it seeps into the entire market, see smartphones. So that's my prediction. Maybe I'm wrong, or will be proven wrong. But I've been knocking a whole bunch of things out of the park recently. So don't dismiss me completely out of hat. And I think that's what you're going to start seeing. More advanced ways of tracking and dismiss and getting rid of people at first, and then now they have these tools. And what do you think they're going to do with it?
Well, and I think in as a closing parting thought for this conversation, I think this tacks a little well onto the vengeful son idea, which is the response to the devouring mother archetype. And there are a lot of people searching for vengeance at the moment, and it's entirely understandable as to see why. What I see myself and perhaps others of us among this cadre is doing is trying to show, given the fact that we've been complaining about these sorts of things for a long time, right? Like, I can understand that if you just woke up yesterday and you realize that the government's a lie, that the media is basically an extension of the government in the United States, all these other things that have been so obvious to people in these spheres for so long, I can understand how you would want to fight back with as much power and force as you can, to the point of without somebody at the center with a real moral underpinning. And if we're looking on the world stage, I can point to maybe one or two people total that would have that would maybe have that sort of moral fiber. You can bear it. Yeah, sure. I mean, Winnie the Pooh is a beloved children's character. So, but without somebody without that moral fiber, vengeance.
You're going to jail now, LB. Oh, you stepped in it now. Oh, you bring up Winnie the Pooh. Oh, suddenly you are.
It's such a weird comparison, but it clearly cuts to the bone for him. That was like one of the early articles I wrote on the web on benawake.com. But it speaks to the difference of vengeance versus the prodigal son who effectively comes home in a spirit of humbleness and gets welcomed back to his father's table. And listen, like I said in the monologue, you remove one too many Jenga pieces, and I think that's what the red pill types are doing in this conversation. Is you're removing one too many Jenga pieces from the foundation of this edifice that's been built, that's already crumbling as it stands. And unfortunately, I think there's some people who want to tear it all down. And at which point it's like, okay, the right isn't supposed to deconstruct. Like that's a leftist thing to do. And there's a difference between taking something apart to understand it so you can put it back together again, and then just deconstructing it because we don't want to play this game right now. Right? That's a contention that we're all going to have to deal with. I mean,
it's to build on that idea. Sorry, I don't want to keep this to make this into a 10-hour podcast, but to build on that idea is that our job is to reverse engineer it. This goes back to civ capital, right? Where it's like, you don't live in a civilization anymore. Take that go build from that assumption. If you build from that assumption, then it's like, okay, well, how do we rebuild it? What do we do? What are the building blocks of civilization? How do we generate civilizational capital to the point when we can start investing it? Because otherwise, you're in this idea of, okay, well, you're going to tear it all down, and it's like, okay, well, and then what? Who's going to rebuild it, genius? Like, you don't know how any of this works. None of us individually know how any of this works. So if you tear it all down, we'll just have to rebuild it, but we're going to be rebuilding it from scratch. And I'm not talking like, when I say you don't live in a civilization anymore, that's a metaphysical claim almost, right? Like the
with cultural ramifications, yeah.
Right, yeah. The spirit of civilization doesn't exist anymore within the empty halls that you walk around, right? And that's why people can say, well, we got buses and this. I'm like, yeah, but they're not providing the function that they're supposed to. They're empty. They're actually costing you more than they generate. It's a net negative. But that doesn't mean that libraries are bad or that we have to destroy all government buildings. It just means we have to find a way to reinvest in them so that they actually start doing what they're supposed to be doing. And, and the ones that aren't doing any of that, well, okay, tear that down if you need to have a little fit. But leave the parks alone, you idiot. Like, you need these things. These things are good. They're not inherently bad just because bad people may have built them or your money went through them instead of something else. It's like, it's you got to be selective with this stuff.
Precisely. Well, and I think, I'd like to think my audience is split between the terminally online and people who live life too much. But maybe that's just a projection of my own internal subconscious. So I think for a lot of people, it behooves them to actually enter the world and make sure that you're spending time with people, even people that you wouldn't normally spend some time with, because it reminds you that we are all human. And if we're Christian, we all have to recognize. I think that's part of our duty as Christians is to recognize that fact. It's also a fact that the snakes are in the garden and that we need to protect against people who want to turn society evil, because we've been on that road for too long, and it's about time we actually took the wheel back from the people who are driving. So I think that's a great place to end this show. Jason, thanks for stopping in. Make sure you guys check out 2-Bit Podcast. I'll be on tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
All right. We are going
meet the base. The guest lineup for this week's going to be yourself, Tommy Salmons, and Jim Jatras, new face for the show. We'll be talking about Russia, Ukraine, some of the AOC political antics, and then setting it up for a sort of a pre-debate conversation. Originally, I had it scheduled for 9, and then Jim reached out and said, "Hey, did you know that you'd schedule this purposely for the same time as the debates?" I'm like, "Oh, no, I didn't know that, but maybe we should change that." So the starting time will be 8, and then taking on the OC Old Glory Club's time slot. So figure it out. But then we'll do a little bit of that, and then we'll see about maybe doing a live debate commentary. I might do that. I don't know. We'll see. I can't do it on YouTube because apparently CNN is already threatening YouTube with strikes for anyone who's live streaming the debates. So we might just do that on X. I don't know. I'm still thinking about it.
Cool. Very cool. All right, guys. Well, hey, if this is your first time, make sure you like and subscribe. Go to BeenAwake.com, subscribe with your email address, and follow me on all forms of social media at the LB Muniz.
If you like what you heard today, go to BeenAwake.com to subscribe for future updates. My name is LB Muniz, and I am not one with the woke.